I just got finished zapping the garden, as they say in Italian. You know, tilling, de-weeding. It reminds me in this morning, my arm was like really acting up last night, but no, now it's better today. Managed to do both rows. Couldn't have done that a few years ago, man. Both sides of the garden, I mean, you can't really tell because of the overgrowth, but trust me when I say it. Couldn't have done that a few years ago, man. After 2018, in 2018, I was in really rough shape. But anyways, that's another video. There's this topic going around, and that's one thing I've always struggled with, I think, for years now, is the topic of climate change and the sort of replacing of one state of exception, one sort of Girardian scapegoating with another, replacing the last 2 to 3 years of the biosecurity theater with a new form of biosecurity control. Both of them present unique epistemic questions about the nature of existence. And I fear that those questions are going to go unanswered because the people who are in control of the narrative, essentially, they operate from a very specific ideological predisposition, one that is very anti-life, anti-human. But I would say that it's complicated because I am well aware of various critiques of humanism from the left and right. I think a right-wing anti-humanism, oh man, I'm going to say something that certain people will find to be, certain, DIY glow-in-the-dark accounts will think is abominable. But I think that there's a viable right-wing anti-humanism. Rather, I think so there's a variety of ways that you can approach anti-humanism from the right. Of course, Michel Foucault and other thinkers on the new left, whatever you want to say, they have their own version of it, but their versions, I think, are interesting in that they take the sort of picture of the subject as not a whole, but as something that is, an amalgamation, a sort of bricklage of different forces of power and knowledge and so forth, and ideology and various undercurrents of the whatever historic process you want. Michel Foucault, he's a genealogist, but he purposefully omits a lot of like dialectical thinking, the way that you find in Marxism and Hegelianism and so forth. But on the right wing, it's difficult because there's an essence to mankind. Because most right wing thinking is an essentialism. And I would say that there is a postmodern current to right wing thinking that is anti-essentialist, or rather uses it to slip a form of nominal essentialism through the back door. If that makes sense. That's certainly people would characterize my work as that. But I think that, there's maybe not an essential self, but rather there are forces given from on high that constitute the self. There are, even in Orthodoxy, they have the essence energies thing, which I'm not very well versed in. One of these days I'll talk to my friend Gravantis about it. But I think that when it comes to the environmentalist stuff, when it comes to left-wing versus right-wing environmentalism, I remember Borzi had this one thing about Linkola, about, he's not inherently anti-humanity. He might have a critique of a particular form of like liberal rationalist humanism that has led to like immense environmental destruction, and the sort of like notion that basically all life should be, which again, as a Catholic, I struggle with. Like, on the one hand, I'm just gonna be open and honest, and this is I don't have any definitive conclusions either way. I don't want to piss off either side, but I do understand the sort of like vitalist critique of the notion of like all life being sacred, to the point where you should bring in everybody and create this, like, what does BAP call it, the global latrine. Like, this sort of like what we call about like the global favelization of because resources have to be spread to everyone equally, blah blah blah. Like that very much is like, there's even like critiques within the church that of that thinking. Of course, the problem is the current papacy is not well, you know, I mean, you go to any like traditional church and you'll see like, you know, this, they're much more open to it than like most normie like mainstream Catholics that think Pope Francis is the best, because he's like finally approaching cafeteria liberal Catholicism that they all grew up with anyways, right? But I think that, you know, it is a challenge. It is a challenge to say that life is sacred. I think that life is ultimately sacred, but then you can't like sacrifice other forms of creation to make this happen, such as the earth, you know, or such as like, you know, destroying the uniqueness of every culture just to fit into this monoculture for like purely like utilitarian and technocratic means. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's the problem. But anyways, what I wanted to talk about is this sort of notion of left-wing environmentalism, this sort of Greta Thunberg thing. And I know like people are obsessed with Greta. Like, I personally think that she's a puppet, and that it's kind of like well, it's evil in a way to exploit this neurodivergent 16-year-old, and there's like all these like, you know, dark money ties behind her. But that being said, I noticed that these boomer cons, they obsess over Greta. I think because like, you know, they kind of see a little bit of their wives in her, I guess. I don't know. There's some like very negative energy about her. But I don't understand the obsession. I think like, you know, maybe she's well-meaning, and I think like deep in her heart of hearts she truly does want to save the earth, but then it's like the way you go about it as very like scolding, like, you know, longhouse mother to be sort of deal. It's very much tied up in the same like leftoid thinking of like the wisdom of a child, blah blah blah. Like it's the same crap, right, that you've always seen. So but anyways, I don't understand this like obsession with her. I think she's just a puppet. Like, you know, it's not her fault. I think like, you know, the thing is, there's nothing of substance to even say. I think that, you know, there's much, I mean, if you wanted to critique like far left environmentalists, it's different because they actually have like a mind there, even though you may disagree with their conclusions. But this is what I want to talk about. I think that when it comes to left-wing versus right-wing environmentalism, this is what Borzi said about Linkola, that Linkola did not hate life the way that these left, you know, the way that like these liberal technocrats do. He didn't hate life in the sense that he wanted people to be redacted. He said that, like, you know, humanity must be preserved. Even like Ted Kaczynski said that, you know, maybe it's better if you have children that are more aware of these problems, that are more live in a more equanimous, is that the word, equanimous life? Copacetic life towards, you know, the earth, right? But it's just like, I realize I'm holding my camera wrong, but I'll fix that. I realize that it's like, it's terrible how the sort of picture of environmentalism that I guess Greta Thunberg becomes the symbol of, unfortunately. There was a Greta Thunberg in the 90s, by the way, but the sort of picture of like very nihilistic, anti-natalist, liberal environmentalism. I wouldn't even say pure deep ecologists, like these radical leftist groups that are into like, you know, they're into like Fed posting activities and deep ecology and so forth. Like, I wouldn't even say that they are purely, I wouldn't even say that they're like, you know, of the same bent. Although they do hate life, they do share most similar beliefs, right? Antinatalism being one of them. And I think that it's in a way, it's sort of like a quest for totality within extinction and within these like very existential threats to the planet, to human existence. And, you know, a lot of like bugmen, like, you know, Nick Bostrom, like you know, bugman philosophy, I guess you could call it, that talk about like existential threats, like it's the whole studies thing. I think like the big problem is that they want this sort of form of apocalyptic completion and totality because they do not believe in God anymore. They do not believe in like even the vitality of the human or the vitality of nature itself. Nature still to them is just as dead and just as much a husk and just as much a conglomeration of processes and biological channelings of different like how should I put it? the channeling of different effects and biological processes and chains of events that come about spontaneously from the various amalgamations of natural forces and biological life, blah, blah, blah. Like, they still have an incredibly reductionistic, anti-vitalist, because that's really what scientism is. It's like a sapping of all vitality, right? It's no longer the elan vital of, like, Bergson. It's like, it's just like these blind forces. It's really is just like, it's the pure bugman philosophy, right? So they don't have any higher belief in even Gaia or this sort of like eco-environmentalist or eco-feminist, eco-spiritualist notion of like, of like, very indigenous style beliefs around the world in the global south, or even here in the north, like about Gaia and like the nature of the earth and so forth. Like, even they have to pollute forms of indigenous spirituality by saying, by grafting on, like, oh, well, they put the the Inuits, they if you got too old or sick, they put you on the ice float, and it was a good thing. They had proto forms of birth control of a certain variety. I can't say on YouTube, you know what I'm talking about. And it's like all this, like, it's like neoliberal colonialization. Like, Stone Age Herbalist wrote a great book, a great Substack about the twin spirit thing, which I will link. It's very, very amazing. Maybe I'll have him on. I'll probably have to like Odyssey that one. It's a hot topic in my country. But I think that they don't really have a reverence for life itself or for the miracle of nature, even if it's really just like a materialistic husk of what nature is. And so it very much is illogical why they would worship nature. But the reason they worship nature is because they have an intense misanthropic hatred of humanity. But that's an easy, talking point. Like, everyone that talks about whatever, like, the World Economic Forum, like, everyone, they say that, right? But I think that their misanthropy comes from their sort of like disenchantment worldview, and their sort of like atheistic nihilism and antinatalism is just a byproduct of this massive spiritual blow that the West has endured for the past, I would say, 100 years. And I think that because they are the creatures of technocracy, because they bought into this end of history paradigm of like the global technocracy can fulfill all need, they even reject that. They even say that, humanity must be severely limited for the earth. But even their worship of the earth is itself nonsensical, because they don't believe the earth has any higher purpose or value. So in the end, why don't you just become an annihilationist at the end of the day? If you don't really believe that the earth has any inherent value, the way that a lot of other eco-radicals believe in, that the earth is a quasi-spiritual, elan vital, spiritual, not even spiritually, but even just like vitalistically imbued with meaning by its very nature. These, like, the liberal technocrat Extinction Rebellion version of environmentalism is itself a misnomer. Is itself like the end totality that they seek, that is like the ultimate expression of like liberal ideology in its decay, is finally antinatalism. That's my point. That is, I think, what people are coming into an awareness of, that antinatalism, extinctionism, these sorts of like very misanthropic ideas around man's relation to the earth, that is the ultimate message of liberal ideology. And there's much more. I think maybe Stone Age Herbalist would be a great pick for this to talk about, or someone else of that ilk, because I don't see any coherence to their picture of environmentalism. Like, even deep ecologists on the left, they still have this like quasi-spiritual notion of the earth. But anyways, that's what I wanted to say. Just a quick rant video. God bless and goodbye.